Welcome to a new video. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. The first story is called, Contracts Can Be Used by Both Parties. This happened some years ago when I was just hired for a part-time position in a retail store. All was good until the summer got close and he offered me a full-time position for when the summer ended, which I gladly took. Less than 2 weeks into the summer, he changed my hours back to part-time. I hadn't thought about getting the temporary full-time thing in writing, as he seemed like a trustworthy guy. It made no sense, as I did a good job and helped out with things my contract didn't mention when I had the time, as I get bored quickly. I found out that even though he has years of experience in the field, he had massively overspent on the wage bill and had to cut down to avoid getting fired by the head office. When I voiced my concern over this, his only response was, "I'm only obliged to give you 20 hours a week, as the contract states." I wanted to chew him out verbally. But I kept my cool and decided that if he wanted to play that game, I would too. When I got home that night, I read my entire contract and noted the clauses that I could use. One clause stated that my responsibilities were unloading the trucks, take care of the stockroom and keep the shelves stocked. Another mentioned that I shouldn't do other tasks, as their insurance only covered me for the specific areas I was meant to work in. The next day, he told me to help out the cashiers as the lines were long. Sorry, I can't do that. As the contract states, that isn't part of my job here and I should refrain from doing that. You can find it in my contract as Clause 9. He was fuming, face totally red, and he just walked away without saying anything. Another thing I had noticed in my contract is that besides my 30 minutes lunch break, I had a 10-minute break I could take when I wanted. So I gave him 5 minutes, walked into his office and told him I was taking my 10-minute break. "What are you talking about? You only have one break and that's for lunch. My contract says otherwise. It's in Clause 10. When I got back from the break, he asked me to clean something up out in the store. I couldn't believe that he couldn't take a hint. Sorry, I can't do that. Clause 9 prevents me from doing it. The next day, a customer asked for help with something. Sorry, can't do. It's not my job. Find someone else. My boss heard about this and yelled at me, but I managed to stay calm and answered with the clauses that prevented me from helping the customer. Legally I was in the right and he couldn't do anything, but I could see the hatred in his eyes. I was still on a trial period, which meant he could fire me with only 24 hours notice, but I could also resign with only 24 hours notice. I knew that once the summer ended and everyone was back from their vacations, he would fire me right away. I had started looking for other jobs and it was going all right, so I decided to quit at the worst time possible when it showed itself. In the last week of summer, he had to fire one and suspend another for stealing from the store. It was the perfect time to quit and leave him badly undermanned for the week. 24 hours and 1 minute before my next shift, I sent him my resignation before I sent a message to my coworkers about how they should remember to take all their breaks and not violate their contract by doing stuff they aren't allowed to do. I heard it gave him a little chaos when people followed my advice. The next story is called, Unload as Fast as Corporate Says. I used to work for a big box electronics retailer in the warehouse. My general manager pretty much hated me and the feeling was mutual. For several weeks she kept insisting that my truck crew was slacking and going too slow when we unloaded the trucks. What she didn't realize was that I had friends at the corporate office, so I emailed one of them and asked if they had a breakdown of timings. Fortunately, he did, and sent me a timesheet that covered literally every contingency, and allowed me to predict exactly how long it should take us to unload a truck. As I suspected, not only were my guys not slacking, they were actually finishing the truck around 30 minutes faster than what corporate had allotted. So I emailed her to ask her about clarification regarding our truck timing and mentioned that they needed to hydrate due to the temperatures outside and the work they were doing. She replied to my email, telling me that she didn't care about hydration, but that my crew absolutely had to have the truck finished in the time allotted by corporate. So, the following truck we unloaded everything into the warehouse, then took a 30-minute break and drank water before going back in to finish up. My crew knew I was feuding with the general manager, so they were well behaved, but amused. She hauled me back into the warehouse and started yelling at me, and I pulled up the Excel sheet, along with the email she sent me. I showed her that we were 30 minutes faster than corporate thought we would be able to handle it at this point, and that since she didn't care about hydration, I made the decision to allow my crew to drink water as necessary, provided they were within corporate guidelines. She turned red, glared at me, and stormed off. We continued unloading the truck for the rest of the time I worked there exactly the same way, as long as we were faster than the spreadsheet. My guys took breaks for as long as standards said they were still faster than they should be. The third story is called, The Most Expensive First Aid Kit. I work as a safety inspector, mostly for hazardous waste disposal and soil remediation, and everything related to that. This story is about a 3-day audit at a project back when I had more spare time and only 2 employees. Now, companies that do these jobs get audited a lot by half a dozen agencies, so you'd think they'd be used to this. The owner though was not a fan of being told what needed improving and took every single observation as a personal insult. After getting a few pretty serious infractions, he hired me for a week and told me to make everything work again. And that's fine, I can fix things. Mostly though, I'll just point things out that need fixing. If you didn't place enough fences, I'm not personally going to bring in more fences. I wrote up a report, starting with the casual stuff like first aid kits hasn't been checked and ended with the bad stuff. The owner flipped out. He told me he paid me to fix things, not to complain about them. He would pay me to personally fix everything on that list, no matter how long it took. I offered that maybe bringing in someone to inspect the first aid kits and fire extinguishers would be cheaper, but no. I had to fix it and do it right. Could I order new kits? No. I don't want you wasting money buying new stuff we don't need. After getting that confirmed by email, I got started on the list. I collected all the first aid kits, emptied them on the table, checked the expiration dates, bought new stuff and filled all of them. It took me a day to do the first 4 kits, since this isn't my job, and also I wasn't in a hurry. When he saw me sorting kits, I got, "That's what I like to see. Good girl." Suddenly, my work speed slowed to a crawl. And I found another 16 kits. Sure, they weren't technically his responsibility, but it would be irresponsible not to check them, personally. At the end of the next week, I'd spent about 100 hours at his site, sorting first aid kits, checking extinguishers, ordering fencing, applying signs, and other menial labor, but mostly sorting first aid kits. And then, the bill came. 100 hours, at a politely discounted $130 per hour, plus about $500 in expenses. That got him 26 newly inspected first aid kits, 6 checked fire extinguishers, and a set of extra fence clamps. The next story is called, Do Your Job. So I work in an industrial setting consolidating waste. I'm a team lead for one of the crews that work in the primary building. Now, being a team lead, I have keys to get into certain places and can drive fork. Now, even though it's not my job, sometimes the supervisor for one of the other buildings asks me to get things for his workers. Also, because I drove fork, he would ask me to jump on one quickly to help him out. Even though technically I don't have to do these and could refuse, I often comply because why not? Until one day. It's been very cold and on Monday my crew was saying that the heater isn't working. The supervisor had just said it's on and was not dealing with it all week. He is supposed to be the one to draw up work orders for such things, as they must be authorized by a supervisor. We aren't allowed to just go to maintenance. So Thursday, the heat still isn't on. We are all freezing, even with 4 layers, and our materials are also beginning to freeze, causing us to not be able to consolidate. I had enough of him dodging us, so I went straight to maintenance and told them what's going on. They came and agreed the heat wasn't on and, just this once, drafted the paperwork themselves as this was necessary. Word got back to the supervisor about me as we still needed his signature. And he calls me to the office. He starts chewing me out about how I disrespected him by not going through him. I tried to say that I've been going on about the heat for days and he didn't do anything about it. Then he said the magical words, "It's not your job, it's mine. You need to do your job and stop whining about the heat." I had it then, so I just said yes, sir and a salute and left the office. He wrote me up but the union got it torn up by end of the day. Now I spent all that night brewing. I was still mad about it on Friday. Well, sure enough, he sent one of the guys to me to open a lock, and that's when it hit me. It's his job to do that, I was doing it out of courtesy. I just put my hands up and say, "This is not my job, go get the supervisor." Supervisors and leads can't just give keys, they have to go themselves. I explain why to the guy and he just laughs and walks back. 5 minutes later, I hear the supervisor on the radio calling me outside. I meet him and he is fuming. He goes off a little on what the big idea is. I parrot to him those magical words, "It's your job, not mine. I'm just doing my job." He stands there, just staring angrily, shakes his hands, and mutters whatever. He then asks me to go grab a lift because he needs some pallets shifted. Again, I refuse and parrot. Well, I guess that did it because he turned a delightful shade of red. That began an immediate attempt of him trying to get me fired for insubordination or remove me as a team lead. The union defends me, saying it really isn't really my job. The union wins, I'm still led and now I have the image of his red face to keep me warm during cold days. The last story is called, Find Your Own Way In. I'm an announcer for a small town radio station. It's a few days before a big fair. I'm working at my desk when my boss comes up to me. She tells me that she's the volunteer coordinator for the fair this year, and as a show of the station's support for the fair, she's getting all of the station employees to volunteer. Now, when your local fair comes to town, it's one of the busiest times for your local radio station. We're broadcasting live from the fairgrounds, we're interviewing the artists who are performing, we're presenting some of the shows, we've got contests going on in conjunction with the fair, all kinds of stuff. Doing all this, I figured I'd be far too busy to take tickets at the front gate or empty trash cans or whatever extra duty the boss was trying to give me. So I remind the boss that we're doing all this, and I decline to volunteer. But she is having none of it. She says she's already got everyone else in the station signed up, and I'm not being a team player. But I held firm. We're going to be too busy doing our regular fair duties to take on any more. She finally loses it. Look. I am on the organizing committee, which means I decided who gets on site and who doesn't. And I say if you don't volunteer, you'll have to find your own way on site. And she storms off in a huff. So I grab the phone and I call up the president of the organizing committee. I ask him, hey, I'm still getting my media pass, right? He says, of course. Why wouldn't you? I tell him what the boss is doing around the station and he lets out a sigh. Apparently, she'd been power tripping on the organizing committee, too. He tells me to swing by his office the next day or so and he'll personally give me my media pass. At the end of the day, the boss comes up to me with a smug grin. Now that you've had some time to think it over, what would you like to volunteer for? I look at her and said, I don't have to volunteer anymore. You told me to find my own way on site, so I did. She had no idea how I did it until I showed up for the first day of the fair and flashed my media pass at the front gates. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.